A lot going on this week. Not a lot of it positive, unfortunately, but of course it will have political implications potentially this year. We'll talk about that with our insiders, Abdul-Hakim Shabbaz, conservative commentator, also from IndyPolitics.org, and Democratic insider Brian Gaddie. We must start with the shootings. Of course, we had Buffalo recently, and then tragically this week, the elementary school in Uvalde, Texas. And while all of this is playing out as to who, what, where, why, obviously, we are going to be talking about what that means politically, potentially, because for a long time, Abdul, anytime something like this happens, and we've had two of them back to back, two mass shootings. I mean, we've had more than that, obviously, but two that have gotten national attention, really, Buffalo and Uvalde, Texas. The conventional wisdom is, well, here we go again, and nothing's going to happen because we have a 50-50 Senate in Washington. We have a very close House. Nothing is going to change in regards to potentially gun laws, maybe not overall gun laws, but at least certain types of weapons, background checks, things like that. Do you think, Abdul, now I'll get to you in a second, Brian, do you think, Abdul, that this time it might be different?
I actually think it will. And don't forget, last year we had our own mass shooting here in Indianapolis at the FedEx site. So we need to keep that in mind as well. What I do think is likely going to happen is I don't see necessarily a ban on any type of weapons per se, but I do see, Mitch McConnell said the other day, he told John Cronin, the majority leader from Texas, hey, work with the Democrats, work with Chuck Schumer to see what we can come up with. And so some of the ideas have been sort of bandied about are, school safety grants to sort of fortify schools, to make sure the schools are safe and make sure other folks are safe as well. So I think that's probably about the best we're going to do right now, is get schools grants for safety, for training. I don't know necessarily arming teachers is necessarily the best way to go, but at least an armed security guard, because unfortunately, this is the era that we live in. I mean, we all went to high school 20, 30 years ago, and elementary school 40 years ago. We did not have these issues or problems, but unfortunately, this is the world that we live in today.
It would seem to me that Democrats would have a good argument against that, because we know, and we found out since the shooting, that the Uvalde school system had doubled its safety budget in recent years. They spent a lot of their city's budget on the police department, and in the end, it didn't matter. So, I mean, if Republicans come at with that angle that, well, we need to enhance school safety, what is the Democratic argument in response?
Well, the Democratic Party response is that we need to invest in mental health. Now, I know the Republicans say that, but Governor Greg Abbott of Texas, he actually did not invest money in mental health. In fact, he cut Medicaid funding for mental health. So the Republicans need to put their money where their mouth is. If they're really concerned about doing something about mental health, then they need to invest in it. So we definitely need to do that as a country. We Democrats support strong mental health, but we know that we've got a problem with military-style weapons. As I like to say to any young men listening to this broadcast, if you want to fire military-style weapons, the United States Army is waiting for you. You can go ahead and fire all the military-style weapons you want if you join the U.S. Army. My dad was in the U.S. Army. You can join the U.S. Army. You can fire all of them you want. We got a problem with too many young men that for whatever reason just cannot handle these issues of growing up in America, and they lash out with violence. So that's something we got to look at as well. I know we talk about, what about video games? What about mental health issues? Yeah, we talked about that. But other countries have these issues as well. They have video games. They have mental health issues. They have domestic violence. But there is something unique about the American culture where our children go to school and they have to worry, will they be shot in their class? That is something we need to do something about. We got to fix it. We have got to fix it.
Why can't we, and regardless of one's feelings on whether certain types of weapons should be available, the fact is they are available. And Abdul, it seems like Republicans, at least in a lot of states, have been intent on making any type of weapon, any type of gun more easily available. We just had the battle here in Indiana over permitting for handguns. And despite police opposition, heavy police opposition in this state, that went through, and that's the law in every other state. It's just so easy to get those weapons. So even without talking about banning weapons, why can't we seem to have the conversation that there should be some regulation in place?
Well, frankly, I think it's because we're so almost sort of super partisan, uber partisan these days, particularly on issues like guns and abortion, that any size thing given a millimeter or a half an inch is seen as sort of a sign of weakness, because people feel that if they give one inch on the abortion issue or the gun issue, then it's a loss. And then it's unfortunate because before we've had the ability to come and sit down and come up with reasonable guidelines, reasonable regulations, on guns, on firearms, on who can get them, who can get access to them. And also, Ray, I think it's important to remember too that the young man who did the shooting actually walked in an unlocked door in the school and started firing. So we need to keep that in mind as well. Even though the school spent millions of dollars on security and the police officers and the whole 9 yards, it doesn't do any good if the guards aren't there. And so for that situation, I think it's important to keep that in mind as well.
Well, and 12 minutes elapsed between the time he crashed his truck during a chase with police, and police somehow didn't catch up to him before he got into the school as well. Beto O'Rourke, Brian Gaddie, Beto O'Rourke interrupted Governor Abbott's press conference talking about the shooting when they were talking about what was going on. And Beto O'Rourke, of course, the Democratic nominee for governor in Texas. That's a very high-profile race. It's a big target, has been for a long time for Texas Democrats. But he caught some pushback from Republicans for interrupting the governor's press conference by essentially telling Governor Abbott that, in a nutshell, it was his policies that caused something like this. What kind of an issue nationally do you think will this end up being for Democrats at the ballot box in November?
That was like we talked about before. The Republicans talk about their investment in mental health, but they don't put their money where their mouth is. They have this obsession, and that's just the best word to use for it. They have this obsession with loosening and weakening gun laws. And I don't know why a 21-year-old needs a military-style weapon. Like I said earlier, if you want a military-style weapon, go ahead and join the U.S. Army. You can fire all the military-style weapons you want. A 21-year-old does not need a military-style weapon. These are the 21st century equivalent of the Tommy machine gun. And I'm gonna show you how dysfunctional our government has become. Back in the 30s, when we had a problem with gangsters using Tommy submachine guns, the Congress came together, passed a law, banned Tommy machine guns, and President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed it into law. Now today, we can't even seem to get together on red flag law, federal red flag laws. I know we have a red flag law here in Indiana, but we need to have a national red flag law. We need to do something about not only that, but about magazine clips. So this shooter in Texas, they said he had almost 300 rounds, live rounds, or between 200 and 300 rounds. That's ridiculous. This doesn't happen anywhere but in the United States, and we've got to fix this. So yes, I do think this is a national issue we can talk about, and we are for having a safer America as Democrats, and we need our fellow Americans to help us in that endeavor, no doubt about it.
People always tell, or they say, at least outwardly, well, we shouldn't talk about politics at a time like this, but inevitably, everybody does talk about the politics of it. Abdul, it's still several months until Election Day. I guess a lot depends on what happens in Congress, if anything, between now and then. But what kind of game changer can an event like the school shooting in Texas, the shooting in Buffalo, the attention surrounding those, what kind of an effect can that have on a midterm election? Keep in mind, this is not a presidential year, so it's a year in which not as many people in general are usually paying attention to politics.
I think it's going to probably maybe move the needle somewhat, and maybe some of those suburban areas, some of those suburban or Republican women who have children in school, and everyone's sort of worried about their kids these days. So I think from that perspective, it'll move the needle, but I still think inflation and supply chain issues are going to be our bigger issue come November.
Brian, you believe, and you believed before this, that Democrats were going to have a better year in November than most people are predicting. Typically, the party in power, which would be the Democrats right now in Washington, typically they lose at least some of that power in midterms. That has historically been true. You thought, even before all of this, that Democrats were going to do better. How has what has happened over the past few weeks, Buffalo, Uvalde, how has that changed or altered your opinion, or has it at all? Do you still think Democrats will be more successful in November than conventional wisdom says, and why is that?
Well, if you look at what happened in Buffalo and just with the mass shooting there, and then obviously what happened in Texas. But if we go back to Buffalo, you had the gunman there that was talking about the great replacement theory. And we've got prominent Republicans like Elise Stefanik, who's the part of the House, U.S. House leadership in the Republican Party, that is a subscriber to this just ridiculously racist anti-Semitic theory. So to me, as a Democrat, and I'm not the only Democrat saying this, if we can show the American people that the Republicans do not have the right or they don't have it in them from a responsible standpoint to be leading our country, leading the House or leading the Senate. We Democrats are the stewards of this country, and we know we have issues like inflation and supply chain issues, but at least you know we're responsible. At least you know the leaders of our party are responsible. We're not pushing the great replacement theory and other radical extremist policies and political positions like the Republican Party. So I look at the Republican Party, they're like the teenage kid that you can't let have the keys to the car. Because the last time you did, he took the Corvette and crashed it in the tree. That's the way I look at the Republicans. That's what they did on January 6th. They do not need to have the keys of leadership. And I've said that before, Ray and Abdul. I think you guys know I've said that before.
Well, we've got a lot to go between now and November, too. I mean, January 6th, we've got public hearings from the January 6th committee still to come. Those are coming in June. So a lot, as we all know, could happen between now and November. Heck, a lot could happen between September and November. We'll just have to see. That Republican
this broadcast is over.
Well, that's true. Yeah, that's true. By the time we're recording now, between when we're recording and when this makes air, Republicans do control the things here in Indiana. They control the legislature, the governors, obviously, with the supermajority, and therefore they set the agenda for what are we know as summer study committees. They have another title, but we know them from our work as summer study committees at the legislature. It's where legislative committees get together, talk about things, and try to perhaps form legislation that can come together in the next regular session next year. And Abdul, one topic that they actually are going to talk about, and I guess we'll have to see where it goes because it seems to get put on the kibosh every year, is marijuana legislation. Now, when a summer study committee comes together, Abdul, first of all, what specifically are they talking about? And what do you think could actually come out of that committee, given that we know Governor Eric Holcomb has this hard policy against the legalization, against any legalization of marijuana in this state?
Exactly. Basically, what summer study committees are, they're sort of formed on Technical Corrections Day, which was Tuesday of this past week. And it's just various topics that lawmakers come up with to study, look at, and see if legislation is needed to address this issue. And you're right, this year, marijuana is on the table. Decriminalization of marijuana and the health effects of marijuana, particularly also THC, which comes to Delta 8 and Delta 9, which are sort of THC derivatives, not as strong as THC, but pretty darn close. I do think that lawmakers will come up with a structure. However, it's got a long road to hoe as long as marijuana is illegal at the federal level. I had a conversation with a couple state senators actually last night, and they were the mindset that is as long as it's illegal at the federal level, they don't see it happening here in Indiana. Now, once that changes, that's a whole different ball of wax. But once again, though, incrementally, baby steps, Indiana is moving closer toward legalized marijuana. I want to say last session, they passed a bill that said if you were in a car accident and no one was injured, you wouldn't be tested for marijuana if you were, say, from Illinois or from Michigan. So once again, baby steps. And I always remind folks, I mean, if you want legal pot, just get on I-74 and drive 75 miles to Illinois, and then you go exit 220, by the way, and you can pick it up. But otherwise, it's going to be a long road to hoe. But then again, how long did it take us to get Sunday retail alcohol sales in Indiana?
Took a long time, and I didn't know your nickname was Google Maps all of a sudden. Brian Gaddie, marijuana, Democrats are trying to make that an issue this year in the election with Tom McDermott, his campaign against Senator Todd Young. Can they make that an issue that is a winning issue, particularly, as Abdul pointed out, that as long as it's illegal at the federal level, it doesn't look like Governor Holcomb is budging in this state?
Well, it's an issue that can help us with younger voters. And we know most young voters favor decriminalization of marijuana. And we Democrats know we cannot win statewide elections without the young vote. So it's an issue that we need to push, and we know young voters support it. So I think we are right as a party to keep pushing this issue. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, but the one thing to keep in mind, though, is that the trick is it's one thing to support legalized marijuana. It's another thing to get the marijuana users to actually get up and vote. That's a whole different ball of wax. Because while they're indulging, eating pizza and smoking funny cigarettes or eating edibles, they still got to get up and go vote and show up.
Not that you can play amateur psychologist here, Abdul, but looking into the mind of Governor Holcomb here, he's term limited. He's not running again. Why would he not change his position, perhaps, or at least alter it a little bit to say that, well, maybe if it's the will of the people, if it's the will of Hoosiers, and a majority of Hoosiers do support some legalization, then maybe if something good comes out of this summer study committee, I'll go along with it. Why doesn't he do that?
I think the governor is just sort of setting his ways on the legalization issue. However, he has moved somewhat since we spoke to him last year about this topic. Number one, he said he had no problem with lawmakers putting together a system in place. So if marijuana does become legal at the federal level, all Indiana has to do is flip the switch. And he's also been in favor of testing for medical marijuana using Eli Lilly and Purdue and IU University. So from that perspective, the governor has shown some flexibility on the marijuana issue. As far as outright legalization goes, I don't think that's going to happen until it changes at the federal level.
All right, guess we can all exhale now because this Insiders has come to a conclusion. Brian Gaddie, Abdul-Hakim Shabbaz, appreciate your time.
Good to be here.
Thank you, Ray.